Okay, 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 okay. Got my Bud Light hat on. John's got his hat on. And what's your hat say?
Poppy and Rose.
Poppy and Rose, what is that?
It is a breakfast restaurant in Los Angeles. You should really check it out.
How have I not been to Poppy and
I
Rose?
don't know. I actually haven't been there either. I found it at the good. I found it in Los Angeles.
You should really go.
Well, the reason I say that is because I was working at a mountain resort in Washington this winter, and somebody came into my rental shop and saw the hat and was like, "Bro, have you been to that restaurant? It's so good." So yeah, I was pretty embarrassed that I'd never been, but yeah, it's
Do you
apparently
know
very good.
do you know why I have this hat?
Yes, because of the trans. I don't. Yeah,
Dylan Mulvaney,
Dylan
yeah.
Mulvaney. That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But also like
You love
yeah,
Bud Light,
also I'm
obviously.
I'm crazy about Bud
Crazy
Light.
about Bud.
Also, it's my favorite drink. Even though I don't drink. No, I always find these hats at gas stations. Like I get
Ah,
hats for my skits when I play like the conservative character
that's
or
right.
whatever. I'll find like American flag hats and things like that. And I saw this at a 7-Eleven in like Parowan or something,
Nice.
Utah, and uh, I bought it without trying it on because it's a snapback, and I just like figured snapbacks just like you can just make it work. You find
Yeah.
the place that, and it's the worst fitting hat I've ever owned. Like it, not just that it like, first of all, the snapback, I have to put it all the way on one snap. I do
Mhm.
have a large head and I
Okay.
know this, but I've never had a snapback where it was down to one.
Hmm.
But it's not just that it's tight, it's just that like the form of the hat is
Yeah.
not,
Hmm.
it's very awkwardly it's very strange. I can't
Hmm.
even really describe it.
Hmm.
The only reason it's sitting atop my head somewhat okay is because of the headphones. The headphones are
Yeah.
holding it
Yeah, it
in
looks good. It
place.
looks good right
But
now. Don't touch it.
yeah, I'm not, yeah, yeah. Anyway,
Mm.
hi everybody on YouTube and Spotify, if you're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. My friend John Lane is here with me today. Hi, John.
Hello.
Looking very handsome, clean shaven. It's been a long time since I've seen your face. We discussed, maybe I've never seen it as your friend.
Possibly.
Maybe
Yeah,
I've
there's a
only
good
ever seen it in
chance.
photos.
Mhm.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know. I know your face from photo, but I just think God, you're a good looking guy with the
Mm.
beard, with the mustache, with the shave. You look great with the shave,
Ah, you're
you
so
know?
flattering. Yeah. I think my eyes pop a little bit better without a beard, and my emotions pop a little bit better without a beard. The person I'm dating right now said that effectively. They're like, "I didn't realize how much emotion you express on your face that you were hiding behind the beard that whole time." I'm like, "Yeah, that's kind of the point of having a beard."
It's
Feel
quite transformative.
Mhm. Yeah, I feel like I was hiding behind a beard for, like, probably I don't know, how long did I have it? 4 years? And just because I do tend to wear my emotions on my sleeve, like, yeah, and so it was just easier for me to move throughout the world, with a little bit less of that being so obvious.
Yeah, that's it. We were talking about this before we went live, but like, yeah, like there, I've met men before who have been married for 30 years and their
Mhm.
spouse has never seen them behind their facial hair. They've never
That's
been unshaven,
wild.
and it's sort of a thing where it's just like it's at a certain point, it's like this is my face.
Mhm.
My face is this hair,
Mhm.
and I just think that that's so. When I hear, when I've met those men who I'll meet like an old cowboy guy. I've met some guys on this movie even where I've been like, "How long have you had that mustache?" And they're like, 45 years. And I'm like, 45 years? They're just like, yeah, like and it's like, so you've never felt the need to check in.
Mm.
I think at the conclusion of shooting this movie, I'm probably going to shave because
Mm.
it's been 4 years of
Yeah.
this and I just need to just check. I just need to see.
We all wanna see it.
Yeah.
So, we're all waiting patiently for you to give us the goods. That
And what
that
a,
upper lip.
oh,
Mm-mm.
and that shave video is going to be,
Oh.
we're going to,
Hmm.
we're going viral, baby.
Going live. That's great.
Yeah, I should do it. Should I do it on a live stream or should I do it with a viral video? That's the question.
Oh, probably a viral video. You should make a viral video. Has anyone ever asked you if you could do that? Make a viral video for them?
I'm gonna make a viral video.
Great.
Yeah.
It's such a funny thing that people think you can just create. Oh, just go make one.
Hey, will you make a
Okay.
viral video for this thing I'm trying to promote? Sure.
Oh.
I got this really
Mm.
funny email. Do you know that kid, Jake something? He's very popular right now for people will give him comment suggestions of like scenarios he should act out, and it'll be like, give us, you know, one of the presidents when they found out they weren't going to be on Mount Rushmore. And like it's him like getting a call from his PR firm finding out that he didn't make the cut and he like has to like be that and or it'll be like give us pink when it found out hot pink wasn't introduced as a color, you know? Like have you heard this?
I
Seen this
haven't.
thing?
It sounds hilarious.
He's blown up recently. He's got
Good for
gained like
him.
1 million new followers in like the last month. Like it's been a
Wow.
massive upsurge. But like I got this email from some as I frequently get these emails, but I got some email from some like social media strategist that was like, this kid has been blowing up. We've been analyzing what he's done to make it
Mhm.
work. If you want to know, if you want to get on a phone call and strategize with us, we can share some of the secrets of what's been and they were like, he's been utilizing the method of like responding to comments. So community engagement and using community. And I was like, guys, like you think you understand it, but you fucking don't.
Not even
And I
close.
don't. And he doesn't. Like no one gets it. Like I do videos where I respond to people's comments. I do videos like that all the time. Like lots of people do videos responding to people's comments. He's not the only person on the internet responding to people's comments. He just like caught a wave and he's riding it hard and he's milking it for all it's worth right now. But like trying to get into the how did this happen? It's like who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, that's not what we're talking about.
No.
We're not talking about facial hair. We're not talking about hats. We're not talking about how to go viral on the internet. I wanted to talk with you, my friend John, about listening. This topic popped into my head, and then I was like, okay, well, who should I talk to about that? Should I just do a mini-sode? And I was like, I don't think I should just do an episode where it's just me about like listening, and I just do a monologue to the
yeah, not a good look.
But I thought of you because I feel like a cornerstone of our relationship is just long conversations. And that's just sort of like what you and I do. You're one of the first guests I ever had on this podcast. Maybe the first? No, you were the second. And I think it's sort of the nature of our friendship is taking turns telling the other sometimes very long stories that take a while, but it's like, I'm going to need you to sit and listen to this story for a while.
Yeah, we had a run there where we would get together once a week and take turns just going through all the things we saw and the things we did and experienced and felt. And but it definitely felt like this your turn, my turn sort of a thing.
Hopefully, I hope so, but also I want to open up the opportunity for you to offer a critique here, but
I've been pondering. I'm ready to go.
I kind of hope that there is something spicy like that. But before we talk about just sort of like us and just what it's like, how I do as a listener, as a friend, because there's reasons why I wanted to talk about this for that. I sort of want to talk in like the grander societal scale. I just got done listening to Megan Phelps Roper's podcast, the Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling. I heard about this podcast through ContraPoints, Natalie Wynn. I talked about this on last week's episode of the podcast too, that and anyone who hasn't, I think you should go watch Natalie Wynn's video. And I do think if you have 7-ish hours to spare, that a companion piece to Natalie's video, it's not like listening to Megan Phelps Roper's podcast is going to like like trick you into somehow agreeing with J.K. Rowling. I don't think so. If you don't already, but it is a podcast that I found myself frequently yelling at my car, like yelling at the podcast because I was astonished at Joe Rowling's lack of self-awareness. She just like kept saying things that I was like, wait, what did you like? At one point she said, she was like, it's when we're the most certain of ourselves, when we're the most certain that we're right about something, that we should be the most skeptical of ourselves. And I was like, oh, hold on. I was like, wait.
Who's got a mirror?
It's like, wait. And she's talking about her critics that feel very, 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 very right in how vitriolic they are to her and how harsh they are with her and how cruel they can be with her. But I'm like, but you've said several times that the reason why you're so dug in is that you're certain that you're correct. Like you've said, like, I know I'm right. I know I'm right about this. And it's like, ooh, listen to yourself there. And then like there were like there is a part where Megan Phelps Roper asks her, she's like, you wrote these stories with these children who have a lot of agency and who like are frequently called upon to make decisions that are really, really big, like really big decisions about their safety and about the well-being of the people around them. And you imbue these characters, these children, with like a lot of agency and the ability to make their own choices. And she's like, and yet your stance in real life is that children should not be making certain decisions for themselves because they're just not mature enough emotionally to. And she was like, and literally her answer is like, well, that book is fiction. I wrote a fiction book. And she's like, and we have to leave the fictional world out of reality. And it's like, whoa, like, come on, what a bad faith answer. Like what but so I was thinking during the episode or during the podcast while I listened to this whole podcast, because there are several times where Joe Rowling is asked, like, people are saying online that you're not listening. What do you say to people, fans of yours, who grew up and these books were very important to them? What do you say to people who say that you're not listening? And her response is, I think they only think that because they believe that if I were to listen to them, there's no way I would still disagree with them. There's no way I would still oppose them. She's like, what they can't stand, what they can't conceive of is I am listening and I still disagree. I have been listening. My heart has been open. I am open to the possibility that I'm wrong. I'm studying the ins and outs of both arguments as much as I possibly can. Being in the position that I'm in gives me no pleasure. It's not fun. I don't like saying some of the things that I say. She's like, but I have been listening and I still feel the way that I feel. And what's interesting to me is listening to the podcast and really trying to listen to her, really myself, trying to listen to her position and not straw man her position and trying to get inside of what she's actually saying. Again and again and again, she misrepresents the opposing argument again and again and again. And this is one of Megan Phelps Roper's questions that she asks her at the end of the show. Megan Phelps Roper has developed this series of questions that she asks herself to check if she's wrong about things, because Megan Phelps Roper used to be a member of the Westboro Baptist Church. And like, so she sort of lives in this psychological space where she's like, I was really, really, really wrong about a lot of things for a long time. And I was certain that I was right. So she asks herself questions like, am I willing to entertain the possibility that I might be wrong? Or is it just, no, I definitely, am I able to accurately state my opposition's argument, or am I just straw manning? And Joe Rowling like answers all of these questions like, yes, I'm willing to entertain the possibility that might be wrong. And she's like, no, I'm not straw manning. And yes, I am capable of accurately defining my opposition's argument. But again and again and again, she doesn't do that in the she again and again and again. I'm like, that's not the correct argument. That's not the argument. And either she's knowingly doing this, she's knowingly misrepresenting the argument, or she's not listening like she's like hearing what she needs to hear to stay where she is, and you know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so that question of like, are you listening in a broader context like that, I think is so fascinating, because it's like, how could a person like Matt Walsh not be aware of the opposition argument in its entirety, you know, when that's your job to contend with it?
Hmm.
How could you not have had a chance to like listen to someone who is accurately stating a very well worded version of, and strong man, like, you know, like steel man version of the opposition argument? And I guess maybe that brings up the question of like, what is the difference between hearing and listening?
Hmm.
Do you have thoughts on that?
The difference between hearing and listening. I feel like coming from Mormonism, like that's the religion you and I were both raised in. It's yeah, it was nonstop hearing but not listening, like to different arguments, for and against, or against the things that I believed, especially while I was a missionary. Um, but yeah, I was only listening as far as it would give me material with which to come back at them with. You know, if I were talking to an atheist on the street, like that was definitely all I was listening for, were just the inconsistencies in their arguments so that I could grab them and throw it back in their face. And but it, you know, is that really listening? Probably I would say no. But I've uh, Hmm. Yeah, I find that this is something that I bump into over and over again, even now that I've left Mormonism. Like I feel like I've got things like we when you've emerged into a new phase of your life where you think you've got things figured out, like that's the first step in the quicksand, I think, of not actually listening to the people around you, because I'm just so often so sure that what the book I'm reading right now, the thing that I'm studying, the whatever, is like the word of God,
Yeah.
um, and facing opposition on like it feels pretty relatable, that position of um like to be so sure of something. And then I've recommended books that in the moment I was just so unshakably sure it was like the truth, it was the, oh my god, this is it. And then I had this experience recently with a book, and my dear friend Tanya, she she ordered the book. She got her hands on the book months after I had finished obsessing over it, and had more time to like actually let the facts of or the ideas of the book settle. And I'm like, oh yeah, well, and has a very scientific mind. So when she told me she finally got the book, I was like, hey, I know, when I told you about that, I had so much confidence, but now that the dust is settled, I'm like, take it with a grain of salt. There's some good things in there still, probably, but you know, but you know, don't think that like I actually, yeah, I just get so enthusiastic about things that that's a pitfall of my, like, I'm not actually that skeptical of a person when I'm reading things, and so anywho, that's
I've
beside
noticed
the
that
point.
just throughout the time of just our friendship and knowing you, that like you get very excited about new
Yeah.
ideas to
Oh yeah.
you. If it's
Yeah.
if it there's a new, like if there's, you're like, oh my god, I'm studying like anti-capitalist stuff, and all of a sudden it's like, holy shit, capitalism is like, it's, you know, like, and it's like, but it's, and I'm the same way. And I think
Mhm.
that this maybe is a product of coming from such a high demand, sure of itself worldview and
Yes.
religion,
Yeah.
is that like anything that is any other worldview that is well formulated, that maybe challenges ideas that were baked into us through the culture that we grew up in is very interesting and appealing.
Yeah.
So
Also coming from a religion that's so fixated on like one truth. It's like
mm,
this is the truth as opposed to a truth. Um yeah, I think that's really like when I became an atheist for a period of time, after being Mormon, like my therapist had to tell me that, like, oh wow, you're sounding very confident that that this is true as well, like just
mhm,
as confident as someone who is religious. And
mhm.
that was pretty eye-opening because I think it's difficult to maintain a healthy skepticism of your own worldviews, which I think is probably, I mean, this has become such a big thing for JK or for Joe, that, yeah, I mean, I think it's easier to look at someone like Matt Walsh and be like, yeah, this is without these political identities, like he kind of loses his whole brand. Like
Mhm.
his whole life is built around his beliefs and like what
Right.
regardless of what he's listening to. It's
And
more
his
profitable for
opposition,
him. Yeah.
yeah, his
It's
opposition to, yes, to certain things. Yeah.
yeah, it's
Mhm.
more profitable for him to remain in opposition than it is to be like, you know what? You're not wrong. You might be onto something. I might not be right.
That's why I think Joanne's case is interesting because, yeah, a person like Ben Shapiro, a person like
Yeah.
Matt Walsh, their livelihood is tied to continuing to, Candace Owens, to their livelihood, their public image, their ability is tied to digging in
Hmm.
and selectively hearing. Whereas Joe Rowling would do wonders for her.
Shut up.
It,
Stop talking.
yeah, and it would be, I mean, can you imagine the story if she came out and said, "You know what? I was wrong about that."
Oh my
Like, I
God.
like, can you imagine the journey of that? Like the Diane Sawyer interview where she breaks down and says, like, "I was so wrong." Like it would be huge for,
Yeah.
and not that she needs the money, not that she needs the
Well,
accolades or
no,
the
I mean, I I don't know, the world definitely for a while, it felt like the world was this very cold place where it's like, if you fuck up, you're done. Like
Mhm.
you're canceled, it's over forever. But it's like that's not actually the reality we're living in. The world is actually drastically more forgiving than I ever could have imagined, which is nice, I think. I mean, I think if she came out and said, if admitted to being wrong about this, it wouldn't only be, I mean, I don't know. I haven't been affected by this. This isn't something like her words haven't directly hurt me. Like they've
Sure.
hurt me on behalf of other people, but so it's really not my place to say that, yeah, the world would be so forgiving. But if I had to guess, like when there is just nothing more impressive in the world than, especially in this day and age, for somebody to come forward and be like, yeah, I fucked up. I wasn't right about that. I thought I was, and I'm really sorry. And here's what I'm going to do to make amends for it. Like donate to this, that, or the other. And it's like, that would be, it's humility on display is a beautiful thing to behold.
I think for anyone who's doubting you, listen. There's anyone listening, going like, What is he talking about?" Like
Uh,
Megan Phelps Roper is a perfect example of that.
yeah.
Like Megan Phelps Roper, like who, and like I'm not sure how I feel about this podcast that she's gone and made. I think it's a little bit of a step in the wrong direction for her,
Hmm.
but she doesn't ever come out and take a position. It just does seem like she's giving a lot more favorable ground in the podcast to Joe Rowling than she is to, say, Natalie Wynn or some of the other trans people that she interviews for the podcast.
Okay.
But
That's a hard thing not to do.
yeah,
With
I mean, the story is Joe Rowling. Like
well, no, it's not that.
yeah,
It's not only that, but so on this podcast, she's actually interviewing Joe Rowling, right?
she's interviewing Joe Rowling.
That's. Can you
Yeah,
imagine? Can you imagine
right.
interviewing something? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't. Did she grow up on Harry Potter? Is that like a thing with
Probably
Westboro?
not.
Yeah,
Westboro
right.
probably, but you know what? One of the most interesting things about the podcast, and again, I don't want to go too far down into a rabbit hole about this
Okay.
show,
Okay. Yeah.
but I kind of want to, God, I'm fascinated by it, because one of the most interesting revelations is like that the people that she grew up around were actually like pretty well educated people. Her family are like, there's a bunch of lawyers in the Westboro Baptist Church. And I thought I knew this, I'd heard of this, that one of the ways they make money is they sue people who like physically attack them at the places that they're at. But they have a family full of like college educated, like bar certified lawyers. And she tells this story at one point about like growing up and feeling uncomfortable with her body as she was going through puberty, and going to her mom about it. And her mom like broke out a book and like showed her the anatomy and like broke down everything that happens with like the uterus. And I was like, this does not sound like something that the mother of Megan Phelps would have done. In my brain, it doesn't,
that's
she would have been
something
like,
that most mothers don't do.
and she
I
was
feel
like,
you know,
I'll answer any
most
question you
yeah.
have about sex and about your, you know, and she was like, yeah, that's, and she goes, and that's how my
Wow.
family was. Anytime we had questions about anything regarding science or anything like that, we would break it down. And she's like, and accurately, not like in a biblical way. She's like, in fact, the reason why we were so certain of ourselves is because we were such an analytical church, and we had broken things down biblically. And we looked at all these other churches and we went, you guys aren't actually doing it right. And technically, like, the Westboro Baptist Church is more correct. It's sort of that thing of like how fundamentalist LDS church, the FLDS church, fundamentalist Mormons get all this flack from mainstream Mormons, but it's like, they're actually doing it more correct than you guys. I know they're more extreme and they seem weirder to you, but they're actually following the way that it was laid out from its
The
foundation.
text is extreme. Like,
Yeah.
the Doctrine and Covenants is extreme. Like, read the book and they're totally doing it the way that it's laid out. Yeah.
And that's basically how the Westboro Baptist Church is like, they're like, yeah, if we sound extreme, it's because the book that we claim to believe in is extreme. The book calls for killing people that disagree with you all the time, and just like for like enemies of God to just be like tortured. Like, if that's not God hating people, what is it? If like God's like, no, you either follow me or you're fucked. And so they're like, yeah, God hates you if you don't follow him. And people are like, that's so harsh. God wouldn't hate. And it's like, what do you call sending someone to a torture chamber for eternity? If it's not hatred, you know?
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, if someone like that, if someone like Megan Phelps can come all the way back and have people, and like give a TED talk and have people be like, God, wow, what self-awareness, and how amazing to hear you say like, yeah, dude, I stood outside of soldiers' funerals and said, you're going to hell. And I'm trying to come back from that, you know? And I think you're right that there is something beautiful that people respond to about that level of humility and willingness to try to make amends. And I've seen it over and over again just in AA and stuff, that like I see people coming back from things that I'm like, just you being willing to acknowledge, hey, I was this person, I did this, I said these things, I hurt people in my life these ways, and I would like to try to do better, is huge. It's you know, the willingness to acknowledge that. But yeah, I think that like, if you can't effectively listen in those situations, if you can't hear, you know, a lot of times narcissistic disorder is like people who, it's just like their brain can't hold space for ways that they may have done harm, you know? And so you'll see people go to their grave holding on to like, nope, I was right when you say that I abused you. Like, nope, I was right. I did the right thing. I know I did the right thing. And it's like, you can't hold space for how you may have done harm. And that's what I think is fascinating in that bigger cultural conversation, is like, yeah, there's the capitalistic incentive for a person like Matt Walsh or Ben Shapiro or Jordan Peterson to hold their ground. But with Joe Rowling, it's like, yeah, like she says, I'm capable of accurately stating the opposition argument. I have been listening. I know what it is. And then she'll go on to say in the next breath, like, and people are just mad at me for saying that like sex is real and sex exists. And it's like, okay, then you aren't listening, because the opposition argument isn't sex does not exist or
Mhm.
sex is a social construct. The opposition argument is that gender is a social construct and that gender and sex are two different things.
Mhm.
So either you missed that somehow. That's a pretty like
Yeah.
surface level point of your opposition, and either you missed that somehow or you're knowingly misrepresenting it to say like, oh, so I'm saying biological sex is real and I'm being persecuted for that. It's like, no, because the
Hmm.
opposition does not argue with anatomical sex being a thing that people are born with.
Mhm.
That is not the argument. The opposition says that the word woman is not necessarily attached etymologically, like through the etymology of the word, or um, just culturally to sex, but more to a cultural performance of a certain role.
Yeah.
And that's where it actually, people will say that it's like it derives from womben, like that word. It's like, no, the actual etymology of that word is wifeman, is wifman, and it
Oh.
was like seen as like the companion to the husband. So literally it was like you didn't have personhood outside of um your
Attachment to a man.
your relation to a man, and stuff like that. But so I don't know. It's interesting to hear a person who's asserting, I promise you, I have listened. I am listening. And I just disagree that I'm hurting you, that what I'm saying, and that makes me as the listener to the podcast go, I'm I'm pretty, because and it's what you said earlier, like that that certainty. Your therapist saying, "Man, you seem just as certain about there being no God as you were about there being a God," and
The Mormon God.
the Mormon
Mhm.
God. Um, I don't think that Joe Rowling is wrong when she says, "When you're so certain of yourself, that's when you should be skeptical." I think that there's wisdom in that.
Mhm.
And so it makes me, as a person who feels pretty certain that she's got this wrong, go, okay, can I answer those questions? Am I capable
Mm.
of entertaining the possibility that I might be wrong? Am I capable of accurately stating her argument and not straw manning it? Like all these things. And then just asking my question, if because I get the question from friends from time to time who don't align with me politically, where they're like, you seem really certain of yourself in your videos and in your stances that you take online. And I just wonder where you come by that, like why you feel so certain. And it does just make me wonder, like, am I hearing or listening to the opposition position in its
Hmm.
entirety? Am I actually giving it its time, or am I switching off the second I find my way in to oppose the argument? You know?
Hmm.
And that's it's
I I think that your confidence can come across as certainty, but I don't know. The videos that I watch of yours, like you state the opposition's argument, and it's usually I feel like you're doing it accurately. And we come from similar sides of a political spectrum, so maybe I'm not the person to challenge you on that in particular, um, but I do look for that in your videos because you do have a big confidence, and you have to have confidence on the internet. Like if you aren't confident in the things you're declaring, then nobody's gonna listen. Um, but I th- I'm have you ever had to walk something back? Have you ever had to be like, I said this, and upon further review, saw in the comments that people were pointing this out, and you know what? Like, I know you've done it where it's like, yeah, somebody in the comments said this, and let me address that because I've thought about that too. But how often have you had the occasion to read something in the comments that you hadn't actually considered and made a video being like, all right, hadn't considered that. Here are my thoughts. I may have been wrong.
Yes. So I make adjustments to my language all the time based on uh, things that people offer in comments and stuff that maybe I hadn't considered, or things that, you know, so there's like little cosmetic things. In fact, even just using the word cosmetic is interesting because most recently I made a video, one of my, you know, videos where I'm trying to present the two sides of an argument, and it was about bodily mutilation, and one side obsessed with using this language of like, you support mutilation, the mutilation of children. And I'm like, you're talking about surgery. You're using the word mutilation in place of the word surgery because it makes your argument sound more robust and like hard to ignore. That it's like, oh, if I disagree with this person, then that means I agree with mutilating kids. And it's like, well, but if I just use different language and I just say surgery, then like we could be talking about all kinds of things. We could be talking about tonsillectomies or wisdom teeth removal, and I can make those things sound pretty gnarly. Like you're going to go into my kid's throat and cut pieces of their throat out with a scalpel, and it's going to like what? You're going to do what? You know, like like you can make that stuff sound pretty grisly if you use different language, you know. But in that video, I used the term cosmetic surgery. I said, you're talking about cosmetic surgery. You're talking about someone getting, you know, kind of corrective cosmetic surgery to look more like the way they want to look. And this is something that kids actually get all the time. Cisgender kids get procedures all the time to like look more the way they want to look, and, you know, that are like invasive and painful and difficult to recover from sometimes. You know, like this is a part of modern culture and modern society, and not just with trans and non-binary people. But somebody in the comments was like, could you please not call gender affirming surgery cosmetic, because it reaffirms the idea that it's not a life-saving intervention, that it's literally just like, I just kind of want to look different. You know, it just sort of like willy-nillys it, like makes it sort of and I was like, oh, interesting. Okay. Because in my mind, it just like was tied to cosmetic surgery, that it's like the same thing as getting just like a cis woman just getting a boob job. And I would call that cosmetic surgery, you know, but it's like, it's gender affirming surgery. She's like, I want bigger breasts. I would feel better about my body if I had larger breasts. And the world's like, go on, get them. Go on and get yourself some larger breasts, you know? And that's like gender affirming care in my mind. So things like that happen from time to time. I don't feel the need to make a whole video being like, I really fucked up. I really fucked up, everyone. And I'm throwing myself on the altar to say, I should not have used, you know what I mean?
Yeah. But I like that example, but it's coming from your side.
Yes.
Of you know, like that's, you know, that's somebody on your side being like, hey, don't, you probably shouldn't use that word. And it's like, oh yeah, you're totally right. That's a good way to think about it. That's, I think, easier than, yeah. How often does it come from the other side?
So this is the interesting thing, because like you said, it's like I really sincerely do my best to represent my opposition argument as accurately as I can. Now I get accused of straw manning all the time in the comments from people from the other side. I think what they're pointing at, or what they're grabbing onto when they say you're straw manning, is the fact that my performance of the opposition character can be less than flattering, that the performance is sort of a less than flattering caricature that they feel. But I'm like, but is he saying anything that is not an actual position that somebody, you know, like, am I giving myself make-believe arguments to contend with to make myself seem smarter? Because that, to me, the essence of a straw man argument is like, you are intentionally misrepresenting the position of your opposition to make your own position seem stronger. And I'm like, I don't have to misrepresent Ted Cruz saying, maybe what if schools had one door in and out? It's like, no, that's a bad enough argument. I don't need to misrepresent that. Like that. I don't need to pretend that he said something even worse than that to, like, you know, like, I'm like, he's taking care of it. And then if I have a character who's like, hey, what about this? What if schools only had one door in and out? People are like, that's a straw man. And it's like, but that's actually a thing that people said. And maybe the guy sounds stupid to you because what he just said is stupid, because because the argument is stupid. Because I could also go like, hey, I think that it'd be dumb if schools had one door in and out because you need more doors for kids to leave if the school catches on fire. Could do the exact same voice. And it's like, just because he has a Southern accent doesn't mean that I'm doing a caricature of a ill-educated person, you know, and they don't always have Southern accents in the video. I'm just kidding. So like, I don't know. That's a tough question because I really am trying to find like where are the best versions of these arguments represented, and what's so frustrating about being so involved. And I think what gives me that air of confidence or that air of certainty is that like doing my best to trudge through the mud and listen to these people and actually like take on their best shot. So often I'm like, that's the best you've got. That's the best thing you've got to go on. And I'm just like I'm so often just so underwhelmed with the Iron Man version of their position.
Yeah.
So it so rarely from the other side am I like, oh, damn, you got me. Oh, being gay is immoral. You just made the argument. I'm like, I've been having that argument for a long time with people about explain to me why being gay is immoral. And I have yet to hear anything even close to like a compelling, like, oh, damn, that's actually pretty good. It's like, nope, haven't ever heard of anything even remotely compelling. Like, and usually people's best shot is like, it's just my religious conviction. And I'm like, cool.
There
also,
we are. That's something.
And also, I think that you're misinterpreting your own scripture there. Like even with that, I think that you're getting that wrong. I think that you're misinterpreting your own book. But like, at least that's something I can go like, cool. You have a religious conviction about that, and I don't think your religious conviction should be written into law. I think you should be allowed to believe that and leave other people alone. But like, you know. This episode is going kind of perfectly and kind of very poorly for me because what's happening is exactly what I'm currently very insecure about, which is I'm dominating the airtime, and the conversation is very focused on me and my psychology and like what's going on in my brain right now.
But here's the thing is this is basically a scenario where you have, and we've talked about this a little bit before, but you've given me a phone call and you're like, John, I've got something that's been on my mind that I need to say out loud, like a story, a piece of my life that needs discussing. I haven't, like you asked me to talk about this a few days ago, and I've been trying to like gather all of my thoughts on it, but it isn't something that my brain has been hyper focused on. It's not something that I've been terribly concerned about because I'm a really good listener.
You are.
I actually don't think I'm a terribly good listener, but I do, you know, I'm good at making people think I'm listening intently, but the amount of retention is just so pathetic. Like I'm a solid performer in that regard, but in terms of like actually internalizing what people are saying, it's difficult sometimes. But I don't think it's totally fair to judge. Actually, I do think it's fair to judge because this is a great example of what we discussed off air a couple of days ago about like this concept of taking turns.
Yes. You know, I had these lovely ladies on a few weeks ago named Sid and Olivia. They're two of my favorite like content creators. They're hilarious, and it was such a fun conversation to have with them because we all speak at the same clip, and there's two of them, and so there's three of us just yipping and yapping back and forth. And I told them, I was like, I love that you guys will just take it and run, and you'll just go, and I can just sit back and just like watch you like I'm watching one of your skits, you know. And we all sort of bonded over being long-winded people
Mhm.
who are not afraid to talk a lot and who are not afraid to like grab the microphone and be like, I'm going to talk now, like in a social setting. And we were sort of trying to parse out the difference between a person who just wants you to like have tickets to their show, their one man, who's like, he's like, you sit there and I'm now going to, and I don't,
Regale you.
and I don't actually care about your input or your questions or your feedback. I like, you can talk and I'm just going to be waiting to continue my monologue. There's that thing where you sort of feel like you're just at a person's like TED talk or something. And you're
Yeah.
just sort of like, I'll just wait.
My mom calls it the John Show.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. I
So
relate hard to that. Mhm.
you've experienced the same way that I have being criticized for this sort of thing where people feel like, oh, okay, you're just kind of, I'm just going to sit back and just sort of let you clearly have a lot you want to get off your
Yeah.
chest right now. So I'm just good.
Yeah.
But like so part of the reason I wanted to talk about this is because I listened to that Joe Rowling podcast. But another thing is like, I had a close friend recently, who I hung out with for an evening, her and her husband, both dear friends of mine, been friends with them for years. And she asked me if we could talk. She was like, hey, I want to talk about our conversation the other night. And I didn't know what she was specifically regarding. We had a little moment in the conversation where we had some friction. I was like talking about like a cover letter that I'm sending out to agencies right now. And I mentioned something that's in the cover letter. And she was like, don't put that in your cover letter. If you put that in your cover letter, people wouldn't hire you. She's like, I wouldn't hire you if that was in your cover letter. And we had a little bit of like, I was like, why would, we had a little friction. And I thought that that's what she was talking about. And I was like, oh, I'm not mad about that. I was like, we don't need to have a conversation. I was like, it's fine. And she was like, that's not what I'm talking about. She was like, I'm talking about just the fact that like, you're a close friend of mine and I value your friendship, but I kind of feel like you don't know anything about me, mostly because you don't ever ask anything about me. And most of the time when we hang out with you, it does sort of feel like we're just sort of there to listen to whatever you want to talk about. And so I was like, oh, okay. So like we got on the phone and I was like, wait, so tell me, so what happened? And she was like, well, it's just sort of how it is to be friends with you. You just sort of tend to dominate the time of like who's holding the speaking conch, or like, she's like, you just sort of tend to run the show. And I'm aware about myself that I'm long-winded. It's why I have a fucking podcast. It's why I do it. Like, I am aware of myself that I have the gift of gab, and that I am like good to just talk and talk and talk. But I like to think that with my friends and people who are like, that I am making an effort with whatever the conversational thrust is to like engage with the other person, and that I'm not just talking at them to expel thoughts in my head and onto a random person, but I'm talking to them because it's a person like you, a person who I trust with whatever it is that I'm talking to them about, a person whose input on whatever I'm talking about I'm interested in hearing, a person whose experience with whatever I'm talking about I'm interested in hearing. And this person who called me is not the first person in my life to make a similar critique. And there's all these things at play where I'm like, I have a tendency to be a little overly self-critical with stuff like this, where I take it on too much, where I'm like, oh, I'm a bad person.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm kind of a self-absorbed narcissistic asshole then. And I can be like too self-flagellating about it. So I'm trying to like course correct in that way and be like, hey, that's just who I am. I am a person who talks a lot. People who are friends with me know this about me. It's sort of part of the price of admission to stay friends with me, is like, if you would, and also people who are friends with me notice it when I'm not talking. They're like, why are you not talking? How come you're not, and so like, I don't know. But as a person who a lot of our relationship is based on having these long conversations where we're And sometimes, yeah, you'll call me and be like, or like come over to my home and be like, I have a kind of a saga to
Mhm.
tell you. And I'm like, great. And we sit down and it's just like, and there will be, and I'm happy. I love doing that. And I'm genuinely like invested in the story that you're
Mhm.
telling me and in that,
Yes.
and again, like the thrill of conversation for me is engagement, is like I want to keep you engaged in whatever it is that we're talking about. But I don't know. So I guess I would ask you your experience conversing with me, or just what do you how
All
does
right.
one
I've taken some notes.
yeah, while I do that, because I just exactly. Exactly. There is
Okay.
my opening statement, Your Honor. Now it
Oh goodness. I think that I've got uh, um 2 opinions on this. You are very good at creating space for me to tell you about something important, and you listen closely and you give good feedback, and I trust you. All the things we discussed before. I will say that if I'm looking back on our friendship, at the times where I came over and neither of us had like a thing that we were dying to talk about, you definitely dominate the conversation.
yes.
And I think that a lot of that is just because I let you do that. Because I like listening to you talk. It's hard for me to know how much of that is just you being domineering, or it's just me being subby and just like, yeah.
Just kind of my kink to be
Yeah.
convo dominated by you.
Yeah, because I actually think of our relationship in this way of like, I'll have things that I've seen, things that I've experienced that I'm not sure how I feel about them. And I'll come and be like, did you see? And this is one I actually want your reaction on eventually. Did you see Beau is Afraid, Austin?
Oh,
What
I
did you
did.
think? I talked to Wit.
I
He
gotta
told me
talk to
you
Whit.
hated it.
Just briefly, what did you love it?
No, I didn't love it, but I did appreciate the amount of detail and quality that existed in every frame. Like it felt like it was thought out in its own way, but it was a lot and probably not something I want to experience again.
Yeah. I th and briefly, that's I think it's important for artists like Ari Aster to be allowed to make movies like that.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for audiences to experience films like that.
Yeah.
They're not, but it's not the kind of movie that I'm like, I'm gonna be watching that once a year for the rest of my life and just like returning to the world of Boas. And like, no, like I'm like, I already live with enough panic in my life and
Uh-huh.
anxiety
Oh my
and just
god, yeah.
and for an
Uh,
artist to be like, let's try to visually represent what it's like to live with panic disorder and just to be like
oh my
constantly and
god.
like and it's just sort of like after about an hour and a half of it, I was like, that's enough. I was like, I got it. And then it went on for another hour and a half.
Another hour and a half.
Yeah. But
So Beau is Afraid is actually a really good example of this because I'm not that like I have areas of expertise and I love movies and I feel like I'm decent at analyzing and understanding the workings of like what makes a film great. But that was definitely one where I'm like, I don't know if this is a good movie. Like it was definitely an experience, but like I would love like you're someone I trust whose opinion about movies I trust. You understand a lot about the flow of a great movie and can break it down for me in a way that I'm like it's like I'm coming to you asking for my own personalized podcast episodes about something that I'm not so sure about. I think that is a lot of our relationship. And I don't think that that's necessarily reciprocated, But honestly, I don't really care. Like I don't like. I've got people that I get to perform more for in that way, like just and so our relationship just isn't designed around me expecting you to be very interested in my opinions about those same sorts of things. But I don't know if that's really accurate. I don't know. Yeah, that's just my first impression.
Well, and I think, yeah, it's like I would come to you. I mean, I would love to talk with you about Beau is Afraid and
Mm,
hear your experience
mm,
and hear, like, it's
yeah.
not that I'm like, I don't give a shit what John thinks about
I think
movies.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
John doesn't know shit about movies. John, have you ever been on the set of Kevin Costner?
Kevin Costner movie.
No, but I definitely compartmentalize and have different people that I'm like, oh, I would like to talk to this
Yeah.
person. But so this is you're a person that I go to for things in my brain where I'm like something that's like just kind of general philosophy and like
No,
psychology and like
no.
where's your brain at and where's your head at with this thing. So I will go to you with something like this where I'm like,
Yeah.
hey, I'm a little insecure about this right now.
Yeah.
And even what you just said, like perform, people will let me perform a little more. I was just on another friend's podcast and I grew up with these guys. I was college roommates with these guys. And at the beginning of the show, the way that my friend introduced me is he's like, the reason I started this podcast is because conversations are one of the great loves of my life. Like I love having conversations with people. And he's like, and you're a person, and me and this guy, we used to stay up till 5 a.m. routinely
Wow.
talking. He was also a person who could go toe to toe with me drinking. So we would stay up and we would drink late into but we would stay up and just talk all night long, drinking whiskey and and we just would keep it running. But the way that he described me, he was like, what I think of when I think about you, he's like, I'm the person that I've always sort of understood you to be. He's like, is fundamentally you're an entertainer. And he's like, you live to entertain people. And he's like, so whether that's socially in a social situation, he's like, if we're at a party, he's like, you're sort of the role you're always fulfilling is like, you're the entertainer. And he's like,
Yeah.
and you're like, and I could take that negatively and be like, oh, you're just one of those guys that's like, you're always on. Like, you're always like, spotlight on me, everybody. And he's like, and I'm like, or I could just take it in a sense where it's like I was saying earlier, there are people who are my friends who understand this about me and are okay with that being the price of admission
No,
to,
they're your friends understand this about you and love it. Like I don't want you to stop talking. I don't want you to talk less. I want you to keep doing what you're doing. If I didn't like your behavior, then I wouldn't spend time around you, but that isn't because you're a bad person.
yeah, it's sort of like, when people say, if I'm too much, go find less, like there are people, there's this like self-care, self-love movement where people are like, I'm not going to diminish anything about myself to please other people. Like I'm not going to change myself so that I'm more suitable to other, like if you don't like the way that I am, you can go find something that,
Yeah.
and I've never really had that ability to be that, like, so I can be very confident in my political positions or in my the delivery of my philosophical ideas or in as just the role that I fulfill as an entertainer and speaker. But as far as my personal feeling about myself, if someone gives me a criticism, especially someone close to me, if they're like, I think that you talk too much or you don't, I wish that you were more invested as a listener, I will wreck myself with guilt and shame
Yeah.
over that, thinking this has been how do I fix this? What's wrong with me? Rather than going like, well, that's just who I am. It's like I don't want to go when someone says, hey, I wish you were a more invested listener. I don't want to go like tough cookies.
Yeah.
If like,
No, that's not a good look.
yeah,
That's a shitty thing to do. If
right.
someone's telling you like, "Oh, you really hurt my feelings by your actions," and you just saying like, "Well, that's too fucking bad for you, bro." It's like that's obviously yeah, it shows that you're pretty uninterested in self-reflection. And I think that's a positive quality that you possess. But
And I'm not having you on the podcast just to do a parade of make me feel better or
yeah,
I
totally.
am like I'm just this because it was interesting in the conversation I had with my friend who called me, who was
Uh-huh.
she said, "I wish you knew more about us." And I said, "What do you wish I knew that I don't know?"
Yeah.
And then she was like, "Huh." And I was like, "Is there something that I," and what it wound up coming down to is she was like, because I was like, she was like, because honestly, I feel like I actually know a lot about them. And my feeling, I'm like, oh, I'm actually rather invested in the story of you two and
Yeah.
your relationship. I know about like your parents and about your relationship with your parents and about how your parents interplay in your relationship. I know about like what you want to do with your careers. I know, like so I'm like, what do I not know? And what it more or less came down to is she was like, sometimes when I talk, you don't look at me. And it got really
Ah,
concrete. She was like, you just sort of look down and I have the feeling that you're waiting for me to be done talking.
yeah.
And so I was like, okay, so it went from something like, I don't feel like you know a lot about me. And I feel like we spend a lot of time getting to know about you to, I have the feeling that maybe you don't know a lot about me because when I talk about myself, I'm not sure that you're connecting with me and,
Mm.
and that anything's getting internalized. And I was like, okay, so that's something different maybe. Someone in the comments here, I think maybe touched on it.
Oh,
Nora in the comments said, sometimes talking, gift of gab, is a love language. You remind me of a close friend of mine, and he does the same thing. It's definitely his love language. Maybe it's yours too. And
oh,
it made
what
me
the
think,
heck?
are you
Comments.
are you now
Oh,
can you not see them? Usually
no.
the guests can't see them.
I
So,
had it on full
or do
screen.
you see them now
I
when you
do.
make Oh,
Yeah.
cool.
Oh, cool.
But and it made me think that comment I think is and I would my friend and I talked about this too, that like maybe the disconnect is just different ways of showing a person how you care about them. And I found that when friends have a problem with the way that I'm showing up as a friend or something like that, sometimes it is just that thing of like, will you show up in this way, and this way? I wish you would show up more in this way, this way, this way. And I don't know, like with all this conversation on the internet about different neurodivergencies and like maybe some people listen better when they're not looking the other person in the eye. I don't.
Yeah, because all you're thinking about when you're looking that person in the eye is how you're looking them in the eye.
Right.
And that can be a lot. I remember, yeah, I've had those sorts of feelings and a lot of different, I think I do listen better if I'm not looking you in the eye because
I
I'm
think so
not.
too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Okay.
that's I told her that. I was like, when my ex was a writer and was working on novels, and she would read to me from her novels in bed because I'm not a great reader. And so I
Mhm.
would be like, she'd be like, I'll read it to you. And I'd be like, oh, I'd love that. So I would
Yeah.
sit in bed and she would read to me, but I would play a game on my phone. And I told her, I said, I'm playing this game because what this does for me weirdly is it like preoccupies my inner monologue. So it shuts that part off. So I'm actually hearing what you're saying better. It's the same reason why I play games when I watch TV shows and stuff. Like it's so I know, and it drives you. You're the like it drives people like you nuts. But I'm like, I actually, what will happen if I just try to listen to you reading to me is
Yeah.
my brain will start talking
Okay.
over
Okay.
you. And if
Okay.
I have that little game going, and it can't be too complex of a game, it has to
Of
be like a
course.
really simple puzzle game where I'm just sort of moving things around up, right, left, right,
Mm.
and up, down, left, right. And I will actually lock in more that way. And I don't know, that's an interesting aspect of
And
like,
that's not your fault. That's not your fault that your brain works better that way. But it,
yeah.
it is important for your friends to understand that about you so they don't perceive your behavior as you not listening.
And I guess then, asking follow-up questions, things like that, so that they know
Yeah.
I'm not just
There
continuing where I
there are
left off.
conversational I don't want to tricks that you can use to get people to believe that you are listening, like repeating the last thing that they said in a sentence is
Mm.
a common tool for that. So yeah, I think that you could probably learn ways to be because perception is everything. Like your friend, yeah, yeah. So there are some cultural norms around eye contact that you need to figure out ways around if you do listen better without eye contact. And so yeah, some strategic things that you could learn, I think, to make people believe that you are listening when they're talking.
Yeah. Yeah, and maybe it is just having a conversation like the one I had with my friend the other night where I say, "Oh, okay, so you feel not like I'm not connecting with you when you're talking and not hearing, therefore not listening if I'm not looking at you. Maybe
Yeah.
if I communicate to you, I, sometimes looking directly at a person for the full length that they're talking feels uncomfortable to me, and I will, and I'll actually hear you better if I'm not looking at you the full time.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
I think
it's
that's what makes me a worse listener than you probably, is that I put a lot of energy into keeping eye contact with people, and then I just think about how I'm keeping eye contact with the person I'm talking to. Because yeah, I've had to work on my perception a lot. I fortunately have my oldest brother is someone who's very socially um he's socially adept. Is that the word? Anyway, not inept, but the opposite. And so he will give me edits on my behavior. uh he's a very handy person to have around for family conversations, because he'll like give me a look and I'll be like, oh, I'm doing that thing, aren't I? Okay, cool. Because I'm doing that thing that's gonna piss off my mom in like another 20 minutes if I don't stop it. And I care about that. I don't want to make people uncomfortable. I'm just doing what comes naturally, and what comes naturally isn't necessarily like what comes naturally. Like I've been thinking about this a lot with self-love. Like I've found the well of self-love within my soul, and I drink from it every day, and I feel so great about who I am, about my connection to deity, about um, my relationships. But that doesn't mean I can't look at my life and see things that I don't like about myself. And part of that is like the way that I make other people feel, and how that has everything to do, that has almost nothing to do with my intention and everything to do with other people's perception. And so, yeah, with the help of my brother, I've made a lot of edits to my social behavior in order to become more likable. Just not, I mean, not like, yeah, likable, but also just a better friend in ways that people need me to be a better friend to them. So,
yeah.
yeah, I have thought of, yeah.
Well, and
Mhm.
being willing to make those edits shows that there is, on some
It
level,
shows
listening.
that I'm great. It
It shows
shows
that
like,
you're
oh
really a good
God,
person.
I get that so many times. Like I tell people like, God, I just did this fucking thing and I can't, oh man. And I had to go back and apologize. Oh man. And they're like, well, John, just the very fact that you noticed that about yourself. I'm like, I know that makes me seem like a better person, but that's not the point of this conversation.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You have said to me though that you love apologizing, and
Oh yeah.
me too. I got to do it recently with a friend, and it's like it's great.
Mm,
It's great when you get to sit down with someone and be like, "I did harm, and here's how."
mhm,
And yeah, mhm, yeah,
Scrumptious. I feel like you and I have lived similar experience. Like we're both uh showmen in that way. Like in I've had two experiences of it being a good thing and a bad thing. And the good thing was I was at a party, and it was a small party. There were probably 5, 6 people there, and the conversation turned to me, and it was just after my separation, and I had a lot to talk about. Like, I had a lot on my mind. A lot had just happened, and I wasn't necessarily giving great detail, but I was like giving this like a lot of feelings about what was going on, and it was just this yeah, it was an incredible, like, I remember the moment like specifically where it was a switch was flipped, and I'm like, all right, I'm the main event. I think tonight's gonna be, it's going to be my night. So, and it did. And it turned into this, like, it was just one thing after another. Like, and don't get me wrong, like, people would interject, people would have comments, but I dominated the evening. And I felt pretty self-conscious about it at the end of the night. You know, everyone was leaving. But then this guy that I was especially, I didn't know him hardly at all, but he seemed like a wonderful person. And a good-hearted person. And as he was leaving, he turned to me and as he was saying goodbye, he said, "You're a really good storyteller. That was a lot of fun." And it dawned on me. I'm like, yeah, that is what I do. I'm a storyteller. Like, when I show up, like, I craft stories. Like, it's the story of my own life, but like, there is a beginning, middle, and an end, and I'm like, and I construct it in a way that, you know, keeps people interested. And I think there's a lot of value to that. I think I think most of the people that showed up to that party were fascinated and interested by what I was talking about, because I honestly had something pretty interesting to talk about. And it went very well. But on the other end of that spectrum, I was on the phone with a friend during the pandemic, and at the end of the conversation, I had what we thought was a very interesting conversation, and I was bringing up especially some like prickly ideas that I'm like, well, what about the, you know, I've been thinking, you know, and at the end of the conversation, he confronted me about how much I had dominated the conversation. He was like, "Yeah, it didn't really feel like you were very interested in anything I had to say," and it just absolutely cut me to the core. Of course, in a similar way that you described. And I've given that a lot of thought. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we were on the phone, and I didn't do well with masks, and I don't do very well on the phone in terms of gauging people's interests or like engagement. And so if I can't see your face, then I don't know if I've gone too far, if I've like if I'm not creating enough space for you to talk. But yeah, so, you know your audience is an important aspect of this sort of personality type. Like, gauge the interests of the room. My mom has literally dismissed herself from conversations when she, and like, one instance in particular, she was like, "Oh, I've already heard this episode of the John Show," and she left. I'm like, it hurt, but it was also like, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Like, she knows that, and she can go talk to other people. Like, there are other conversations to be had, and these are people that I want to share this parts of my life with, and I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that.
Yeah, I everything you're saying is so spot on to actually like the meat and guts of actually what I want to get into with this topic, because I wonder if when people bring up this criticism of like you talk too much, or you don't seem interested in what I have to say, or you're not sharing the stage enough or whatever, there's part of me that's like, is there a weird thing going on there where it's like, are you listening as the person, or are you just focusing on the fact that you're not getting to talk? Is there like, because I like, there are dynamics and roles that people fulfill. And like you said, being a storyteller or being an entertainer or something in a social setting, that has value. There are like different roles that people fulfill. And I also understand that, like, as a straight white cis guy, there's a lot of sociology baked into like why I feel entitled to speak, you know, in like that if I'm sitting here talking about how like I've always just sort of like been okay talking, you know, and even though it's like that's not really actually true. Since I was a kid, I've been very, very hyper aware of how much I speak. I once was asked a question by either it was a therapist or I think it was my therapist who asked me. She said, "What is your inner monologue typically when you're having like conversations with people?" And I said, "Well, when they're talking, there's a lot of my inner monologue saying, wait, let them finish. Wait, hold on, let them finish. And because I'm like, there's a lot of times where I want to jump in with like my thought about what they said, and I have a lot of like, just wait, it's okay. You're going to take a lot of time when you speak, so just wait. And I'm like, and then when I speak, there is always a ticking clock in my head going, okay, all right, that's enough now, that's enough. And I'm like, as a person with panic disorder, I'm not sure that that's like the best thing for me mentally, that even when I'm doing what comes naturally to me, which is just fucking talking a lot, you know, there's this anxiety behind it of like the Sonic the Hedgehog swimming underwater and the music's going dun 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 dun, dun and it's getting more and more intense, and it's like, okay, stop talking now and ask a question or turn it over to the other person now. And there's so much anxiety about like just sort of interacting socially in the way that comes naturally to me, because my entire life I've been confronted with this criticism of like, and it's gone both ways. Just like you said, I've had people who have told me, I love listening to you tell stories. I love when you're at a party because you're very entertaining and like you always keep the conversation flowing. I've had it go that way. I've had people say, I love having long introspective chats with you. You're one of my favorite people to talk to. And I've had people my entire life say, boy, you sure talk a lot, don't you? And and you don't really leave a lot of room for other people, do you? So I've had it, just like you said, go both ways. And I've had to start evaluating, just so I'm not always just beating myself up and carrying all the shame, evaluating where that thing comes from the person who thinks, God, this guy likes the sound of his own voice, doesn't he? And it's like, I hear people sometimes about the show Armchair Expert, and I've even thought this before, but people will be like, I like that show, but like sometimes I just wish Dax would let other people talk more. Like he sort of just talks the most of anyone on the show, more than the guest, definitely more than Monica. And it's like they're seemingly co-hosts, but he's the one who does. And I'm like, but there's a dynamic there that seems understood in their relationship. And like, it would be weird. It would honestly be a weird show if Monica Padman was talking more than anyone else on the show. And not saying that like Dax as the man, should be but like just socially. And I don't get the idea. And I don't think anyone who listens to the show gets the idea that Dax is uninterested or unaware of what's going on in Monica's life. Like he seems to be an engaged and interested friend. And and that there's a reason why they are still friends after all these years, and why they maintain a mostly healthy working relationship and partnership. But like the dynamic is such that he's the entertainer, he's the storyteller, he's the, you know, and even when they have guests on, like he's comfortable riffing, and I'm sure that he's heard his whole life, all right, that's enough, man, that like let the other person speak now, you know. And I wonder if there's room to go like, that's that guy. That's how that person.
That's why he has a podcast. Because he's that guy.
Yeah.
That's why you have a podcast. That's why I should probably start a podcast.
You should probably start a podcast. The John Show.
The John Show. Oh my God.
I'll listen to the John Show.
Great.
And then that's part of it, is like not beating myself up, not sinking myself in shame or guilt over it. And the other part of it is like, there's this dynamic when people bring up a criticism like that. And it reminds me of, and this is how I've been talking about it with people lately, as I've been thinking about this idea, is like when I had roommates, most of my adult life, I lived with roommates. And invariably there would always be that one roommate who would be like, we have to have a house meeting. We got some shit we got to work out. And they would be like, guys, I'm the only one who does dishes. I'm the only one in this house who does dishes. And I would always at that meeting be like, well, I know that I do dishes. So I know that you're not I know just like on a surface level, you're not the only one. And I know that I saw Brett doing dishes 2 days ago. So I know that like at least Brett did dishes one, but it's just like not a thing that enters into my head. And there's sort of a thing at play where I'm like, so for the person who called the meeting, like every time you're doing the dishes, are you thinking in your head, of course I'm doing dishes. That's one of the things that I do as a person who lives here. Sometimes I have to do dishes and sometimes other people have to do dishes. And today it's me. Or are you thinking, this is so fucked up that I'm doing the dishes right now? Why aren't the other people who live here doing this? I shouldn't be doing this. And I think there's a little bit of a thing happening there where I'm like, I just think that every time you take the trash out or do the dishes, you sort of see it as you being put upon by everyone else. Whereas when I do the dishes and take the trash out, I just think that's just I have to do that sometimes as one of the people who lives here. And I wonder if that's what's going on sometimes when people are like, you didn't really leave a lot of space for me in there. I'm like, so were you listening to what I said? Because I was actually trying to engage with you. I was actually trying to like have a conversation with you. I was actually like, and were you listening or were you just counting how many minutes I was taking up and how much hot air I was sucking out of the room and just thinking, this is really fucked up that he's not letting me talk? Because I'm like, that's definitely never going on in my head when another person is talking. As a person who's long-winded, it would be insane if I was like, okay, let me talk again. You know, like I would never think that. But and I can see how a person talking with a person like me who talks a lot could feel that way. But I'm also like, could there be a criticism that goes the other way? That's like, are you listening or are you just upset that you're not getting more of the
airtime or of the spotlight? Yeah.
You know?
I like that. Yeah. I think there are definitely circumstances like that. I don't think that was the case with my friend. Looking back on the conversation that he critiqued, I thought it was an accurate, fortunately he did it like right at the end of like he didn't wait. So I could, it was pretty fresh in my mind how much I had spoken in the conversation and how little space I'd created for him to speak. But I definitely think you're onto something there.
And I'm the same. I like the conversation that I just had with my friend. I was like, oh no, you're not wrong. That night, I did dominate, and as I'm prone to do. And so I'm like, it's not a unfair critique or unfair bit of feedback. But I also think that there is an element where I'm like, so when that's happening, are you just sort of sitting there stewing and mad that, and then like when the door opens up for you to jump in, if that is what's happening, why don't you just like aggressively take it back and be like, well, now I'm going to fucking talk for, like, I don't know, like it, like, so
how good are you asking questions of people?
And that's the big thing that I'm wondering right now is like, part of what I like about the podcast is that it's sort of, I think training me to try to involve the other person with questions and stuff like that. I listen back to the podcast a lot just to hear how I'm doing at making sure my guest had adequate time to participate and making sure I'm not just talking at the guest. I hear by listening back to the podcast that I am a person who talks a lot. I'm not the kind of podcast interviewer or host who just like asks a question and then lets the guest speak and then asks the next question. That's not the kind of show that this is. And I definitely hear that.
Yeah.
But I also hear stuff that like the guest will often say things that I missed. I'll listen back and I'll be like, whoa, I didn't hear that. Which means I was already thinking, which happens where I'm like, is there time for me to fit this segment in that I wanted to get, and stuff like that. But the questions thing, oh man.
I have thoroughly enjoyed this whole conversation. This isn't me wrapping things up. This is just So I don't want you to feel like I'm having a negative experience here at all. But I just a thought came to mind of, you should listen back to this episode when you're done and count how many questions I asked versus how many questions you asked.
This is probably the fewest questions I've asked in many episodes, which is so interesting because normally I write out a
Okay.
list of questions I'm going to ask the guest. And so I literally go through the list as the conversation is progressing.
Wise.
But for this conversation, I just had like in my head,
Yeah.
like general bullet points. And I was like, John and I can talk.
We're
We'll be fine.
buds.
And I definitely do think that I was just trusting that, like, I was like, he'll get in there. But what's so interesting about this episode is like the very thing that I'm concerned about, I think played out where like I definitely dominated and I definitely didn't ask as many questions as I would like. And then there's a thing about like, what kind of questions are you asking? Am I just asking questions about the thing that I'm talking about and asking the person that I'm talking to continue along the lines of the conversation I want to have? Or am I like willing to set to rest, say like, I said my thing, I told my story, I did my bit of entertainment, and now would you like to tell me something, like what's going on in your life? And then, oh, how did that make you feel? And like, am I asking questions that open up new lines of story in the conversation, or am I asking questions that keep the story of the conversation fixated on where I want to be?
Yeah. I wonder about like how often do you so we had a topic that we were talking about. I feel like you always generally have a topic that you've and you have questions a lot of the time. How often do you like, I feel like active listening will lead you down a different path than what you had maybe intended, but like how necessary is that in hosting a podcast? Like, or is it like how much value is there in following a tangent into like this new interesting territory versus like, all right, we could go down that hole, I know where that leads, let's come back and stick to this topic. Like,
and God, if it wasn't a podcast, then I'm all about tangential territory. I'm all about let's go down that rabbit hole. Let's fucking do it. If it wasn't a podcast, and I do some of that on the podcast. I have my little outline of questions that I want to ask it, but like, and I also acknowledge I might not get to all of these all the time, because I do want to leave room for the guest might introduce something that I hadn't considered, or introduce a territory that I hadn't even thought of while prepping for the episode, and I might want to go there. And sometimes that happens. And sometimes we just wind up somewhere where I'm like, that's not what I planned, but it was on topic and it was maybe more interesting than what I had planned because it involved the other person bringing in their thing to, and I think that's happened several times just in the conversation that you and I have had. You've introduced several things that I'm like, that's actually, yeah, that's great. Like that's actually, and so definitely that happens, but it's more structured by me than it would be in a real life situation.
Yeah, of course. Which I think benefits the listener. Like, I don't think, in fact, I don't really love conversational podcasts where it's like following like, unless I love the people, but I have several podcasts that people are big fans of that I just don't like because it's too conversational. Like, I prefer something more structured.
Well, I mean, like Armchair Expert, like I've sort of stopped listening to the fact check portion of the show because it's stopped being a fact check and it's literally just them and like Rob sometimes, and sometimes David Farrier will pop in and they're just like talking. And I think some people love that. Some people are like, I like just hanging out with Dax and Monica and Rob in the room and just sort of like, what happened this week in your lives? But sometimes I'm like, y'all are just like, this is just like pre-roll chatting. You're just like, you're talking for like 20 minutes about just fucking like Monica's groceries. Like, and I'm like, 15 minutes ago, we were having a very compelling conversation with David Letterman. It was like, it was very interesting. And like, now we're like, so I want whatever the conversation is going to be on the podcast to be in the vein of, and I still think we are
Yeah.
in the vein, and I do think we should wrap up here soon,
Sure.
but yeah, I definitely am like going to continue doing my own inventory on this.
Yeah.
It's going to continue being a thing that comes up in my life. I don't foresee a situation in my life where I suddenly become like significantly less
No.
long-winded. I don't know that that's in the cards for me. I think I'm going to be a storyteller and an entertainer till the day I die.
Great.
But yeah, the question of like how to weave in more conscious habits to not only listen better, but to make sure the person that I'm listening to feels like they're being listened to.
Yeah.
But then,
What do you
yeah,
do on your off days? Like if you come to a party and you're like, I'm really not feeling, or to a hang, you're just like, yeah, I'm just kind of down.
I'm quiet and people mention it and people go, "What's wrong?" And I go, "Nothing. Just, like, or,
So I think I tend to have that reaction as well. Recently, I tried something different with that energy. Because I was just feeling like shit. Like I just didn't feel, I was pretty depressed. And I really wanted to enjoy this hang with this special person. And I was like, I'm not sure how I'm going to pull this off. But then it dawned on me that it's just like, just keep asking them questions. Like because here's, if you don't have, my mother told me since a young age, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. And so I knew that the headspace I was in, I was feeling very cynical. I was feeling like I could turn any topic into something that was heavy and negative and shitty. And, it's just like, oh, well, have you thought about it this way where it's, you're not actually a good person, and nobody wants that. Nobody wants to hear that for 2 hours. And so I'm like, all right, so don't talk. Don't like go on. Like, this is not your night for being long-winded. Like, you'll just bring the energy down. Like, but you can contribute still by listening and by just trying to find the most interesting questions you could ask. My favorite compliment that I get from friends, especially on a night like that, is like, wow, that was such an interesting question. Like, and yeah, sometimes I can be in a mood where that's what I'm going for, instead of like being the person on stage. It's like I feel like I am the stage, and it's like let me support this person. I'm like, I want you to be the performer tonight, because I'm not really up for it.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it's yeah, I've been trying that out a lot this winter because I've had a lot of down days because a lot of things are shaken up, and yeah, it's in this phase of my life, like I have a lot of incredible days and I have a lot of very difficult days. And so on the difficult days, like I don't want to just be in a hole. Like that doesn't actually help. But to be a really supportive listener on those days, actually it creates a better conversation, and it also makes me feel better. So there's that. Anyway,
I love that. I love that.
Cool.
And there are times, and I'm sure you've experienced this too. There are times where I'll be talking to someone where I'm like, I'm really crushing listening and asking questions right now.
Yeah.
Like there are these times where I'll
Yeah.
be like, I'm really just letting this person tell me.
You're good at that. I've had many stories this winter. Like we've talked, once or twice a month. And when I've got something to say, like you're very engaged, like you let me get it all out there, but in a way that feels like you're actively listening, and it's great.
Well, and it really helps when I'm talking to like another storyteller.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's like on set sometimes I'll be like talking to another actor about their life, and I'll just like ask them like, oh, and then what about this? Like I'll just keep asking them questions. And if it's an actor, like they're just like, oh, I'll just go.
Yeah.
But if like I'm trying to talk to like some of these cowboys out here, like I'll be on my horse and I'll just be like, so how long you been cowboying? And they'll just be like, whole life. And I'll be like, have you done many movies? And they'll be like, first one. And I'll just be like, how's it going so far? Like, are you having fun? And they'll be like, Yeah, it's all right. Can make money a worse way. And it's just like, yeah, you could be doing a lot of worse things. And they're like, yeah. It's just kind of like, I'm like, all right, well,
Yeah.
yeah. And then it's like,
And they get to tell you through their language that they don't want to talk to you.
or that just like that's like as much as we need to say. You know?
Yeah.
That it's
Yeah.
like,
We can
you
also
know?
just sit here in silence, and that's nice too.
Yeah. And I'm like, and I don't just like launch into some story. I'm not just like, well, like the reason why I talk a lot on my fucking podcast and to my friends is because I'm like, well, you're the people who I want to talk to about whatever it
Yeah.
is that's on my mind or whatever it is that I'm going through. And I trust that by it's like when I first started this podcast, I think the first thing that I ever said, like the preview, I was like, you might not like the sound of my voice. Like you might just hear my voice and be like, ugh. And I'm like, and then this podcast would not be for you. But if you like the sound of my voice and if you like the way that my brain processes ideas, and then like you might like listening to this. And I assume that people who are still listening to this show 3 years later are like, yeah,
Wow.
I'm all right with how much you talk,
3 years.
Yeah, there's a lot of hours of me talking
Damn.
a lot,
That's cool.
but I also think a lot of hours of examples of me having like good conversations with other people where like I wasn't just talking at them for, like
Yeah.
I think, so I don't, it's an interesting thing to consider that when we're asking, people in the culture to listen, that it's like, just to ask yourself, like, how am I doing at
Mhm.
listening?
Yeah. I think that's I think you need to continue evaluating that all the time. I mean, not all, like I don't think you need to constantly be thinking conscious of that necessarily, but having checkpoints in your life where you're like, how am I doing with that? Am I listening as much as I should be? Yeah, that's just a part, like that's a part of being a healthy storytelling type. Probably. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for giving me so much of your day.
Can I just say I miss you a lot.
I miss you
I
too, man.
God, I miss hanging out with you. It's one of my least favorite parts about not living in Los Angeles anymore. Like we used to get together every week and
Yeah.
talk for like 4 or 5 hours about
Mhm.
like yeah, you were an incredibly important person in my life when I needed you to be there, and you were there. You listened really well during that whole thing, and yeah,
And you to me.
yeah, right. Like
Yeah.
it was a beautiful friendship, a moment in
Mhm.
our friendship for sure, and I hope we get to do more of that somehow.
I
I don't know.
I'm sure we will. It's yeah, I miss you too, and I miss it being
Mm.
in person, but I think we've done a pretty good job of keeping up, even though it's not weekly, but we've been prioritizing, like, we make time. We go like, "Do you have time
Yeah,
for a call tomorrow?"
yeah,
Because, well, you know what that means. It's not like
yeah.
it's like, "Do you have
This isn't.
time
Yeah.
for an hour and a half, 2-hour long phone call?" Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah. Hmm. Cool. All right.
yeah. All right, man.
Well,
Well, I love you,
I
and,
love you too.
yeah, and thank you so much for making the time today,
My pleasure.
yeah, and for doing this. Do you have anything you wanna plug right now? Yeah, you got music people could go listen to. People should listen to your music.
Sure. Yeah, I
Yeah.
have music under a stage name called Weebalo. It's Webalo, and yeah, a record that I released under that name relatively recently. And yeah, I'm also currently I'm videoing getting a lot of footage of me building out this. I'm converting my Prius into like a sleeper Prius for this big road trip that I'm going on to find myself, and or whatever. And yeah, so I don't know what I'm gonna do with all that footage, but I'm sure I will be posting about it on my Instagram, Jean Jacket John. So you can stay tuned if you want, listener. Oh, that felt gross. But there it is. I did it. Cool.
Jean Jacket John on
Jean Jacket John.
Instagram and We Below on Spotify. Go listen to that record. It's really, really lovely. You'll listen to it and be like,
Thanks.
"What?"
What?
Yeah, you're
Mm,
gonna be surprised at the
mm,
quality of it. It's very, very
mm,
good.
mm.
All right, buddy. Okay,
Farewell.
I'll talk to you later.
Sounds good.
Bye.
Bye.